Hi there, I'm Dr. Matt Finch. I'm an Associate Fellow of Said Business School at the University of Oxford, and I'm super pleased to be with you for part of the Right Here, Right Now Global Youth Climate Summit. At the university, I teach and research and work on how people make decisions when the times are uncertain, when we can't be sure what's going to happen tomorrow. How do we make a good decision today? And in this short conversation, we're just going to think a little bit about a few basic tools that might help you start to think about some of the uncertainties that surround the projects that you might undertake, that might surround your community, that might surround different institutions, different nations, really to say, actually, what's out there that might change the world we live in, perhaps in ways that aren't completely within our control. So this session is called Navigating the Sea of Uncertainty, Challenging Assumptions about what the future holds. And already there are questions coming in, and I couldn't be happier because the first question is actually the perfect lead in to the whole conversation that we're about to have. Lena from Hamburg in Germany says, in school, we're often asked to make climate predictions for the future. Should we be doing less predicting and more imagining? Which is an incredible question. It sounds like a great school as well, Lena. I love the idea you're already making predictions. The challenge with predictions is that often we sort of have a model in our heads. We can't go to the future. We can't visit it because we don't have a time machine. We can't gather data from events which haven't happened yet. We can't gather evidence from the future. The future is this place that we never get to until it arrives and turns into the present. So the challenge for us is that often when we predict, we have a kind of model in our head. And we take what happened yesterday or in the past and we put it into the model. And then we say, so where do we think things are going tomorrow, next year, in 10 years, 50 years, 100? And some of these models are incredibly technical. They can involve mathematical modeling of the climate. They might involve all kinds of notions of what might transpire, different ways of predicting things. It can just be as simple as, well, it's Wednesday tomorrow, so I'm probably going to school tomorrow. And I know I've got geography tomorrow, so I better do my geography homework tonight. I better make sure that I take the things I need for geography tomorrow. Some of the things are pretty predictable. Like in my life, I'm pretty sure I'm going to want coffee tomorrow morning. So the night before, I'm going to clean the coffee pot. I'm going to get everything ready. So when I wake up in the morning, I can have my coffee. And I'm making a prediction about the future. But the truth is, I don't know for sure. I might get up tomorrow morning and I have an upset stomach and I don't want coffee. I might get up tomorrow morning and there's a power cut and I can't even turn the kettle on to make the coffee. Maybe the refrigerator broke overnight and now the milk that I want in my coffee has spoiled. All kinds of things can happen which weren't part of my prediction. That doesn't mean the predictions aren't useful. It just means that they're not everything because we never really know what the future holds until it arrives. So Lena says, should we do less predicting and more imagining? I don't know if it's about a balance of less and more, but the question is really what happens if we start to imagine what else might happen beyond what we predicted, beyond what we assumed, even beyond what we hoped or feared? What if we stretched our sense of what the future might hold? And one of the ways of doing this is to think about the sea of uncertainty which surrounds us and challenging assumptions about what the future holds. A little bit later in this session, we're going to experiment with this tool of the island and the sea. And what I'm going to do, first of all, is show you a diagram of the kind we use when we're working with senior decision makers, people in institutions here at the university. So one way of thinking about uncertainty is like this. You've got an organization and it wants to think about the future. It has a sense that maybe it does need to imagine what else could happen. Maybe it feels like the world around them is a little bit turbulent, a little bit uncertain. Maybe new things are coming into their world, like the arrival of AI. Maybe there are situations where it's really difficult to figure out exactly what's going on, ambiguous situations. And so this organization says, it's not enough to just assume that tomorrow was like yesterday. We've got to try something different. And so what we do together is we start to map the island and the sea. And the island is like this. It's everyone that you interact with right here and right now in the present day. So working at a business school, if we think about an organization like a business, they have customers, suppliers, investors, competitors. They might work with governments, they might work with NGOs, they might work with the public, they might have partners. And this is the island that they live on. just like you will have an island in your life with your family, your school, your friends, the transport system that gets you to the places you want to go in your life, the people who provide your internet connection and your power, everything that services your home, the places that you buy your clothes and your food and everything else in your life from, all those things that surround you, your local government, your national government, all of this is on your island because it is a collection of people who you have a direct relationship with right here and right now in the present day. And the technical term we use for this at Oxford is the transactional environment. This is the island that we live on, and everyone that we interact with in the course of going about our day lives on that island with us. But then out beyond the edge of that island, there is a whole sea of uncertainty, factors, forces, trends, and uncertainties which affect our island, but they seem to be beyond our direct control. And you can see here, we have an example, that organization on the island with its customers and suppliers and competitors and so on. Well, actually, they're affected by bigger things like the world of geopolitics, like climate change, technological changes, social values, changing regulations, even the demographics, how many people are there of each age group? What is the population made up of? Questions of ecology, even things like patterns of work. Do we work from home? Do we work remotely? Do we work Monday to Friday? What hours, what days do we work? What times of year? Does everyone take the summer off for a big holiday? There are these forces in the sea of uncertainty. They affect the island that organization lives on, but the organization can't totally control them. And so what we do is get people to think about what could happen if those forces in the sea of uncertainty came ashore in ways that we didn't expect. Now, I know that can sound like quite abstract and quite technical, so let me give you a really practical example. We're going to travel back in time about 20 years just before the invention of the smartphone, these amazing tools which have been so effective to our lives and which for some reason, unless I hold it here, it's going to disappear next to my face. It's the power of virtual background. So imagine you were a taxi driver in New York City in the 2000s, 20 years ago. You didn't have smartphones then. So basically, the way things worked would someone would stand on a street corner, hold up their hand, and you, the taxi driver, you'd pull over. And they'd get in and they'd tell you where they wanted to go. And you'd drive them there. And you would charge them a certain amount per minute that you waited or per mile that you traveled. There would be money for the tolls crossing the bridges, going through the tunnels. You kind of knew how it worked. Someone got in your car, they told you where they wanted to go, and you drove them there, and you knew what to charge them, and they paid you at the end of the trip, cash or card. And there were other people on your island as well as a taxi driver. There were the mechanics who fixed your taxi. There were the people running the gas stations who gave you the gasoline to go in the car. You could rent your cab, maybe from a cab company. You might compete with other taxi drivers, but you could also collaborate with them in a union. And most importantly of all, there was the New York City Taxi Licensing Authority. And they were really important because you gave them a lot of money in order to have your taxi driver's license, which is called a medallion. It was this really big deal. Should I pay all this money for a New York taxi driver's medallion? And the nice thing is, there wasn't a lot of uncertainty being a taxi driver for most of the 20th century and for the first few years of the 21st century. You knew how things worked if you wanted to be a taxi driver. It was always pretty much the same. Sometimes a year were busy, sometimes a year were a bit quieter, but basically you knew how life worked on your island. It was pretty reliable. And so you knew, yeah, if I spend all that money to get a taxi driver's license, I can make that money back and make more money doing my job, driving around my island, taking people from A to B. Pretty simple stuff. The trouble is, at the end of the 2000s, out there in the sea of uncertainty, there are factors waiting to come ashore. Technological changes, social changes, changes in the regulations of public transport in New York City. So what you see is the arrival of the smartphone. You see changes in regulation where New York City says, do you know what? We're not going to regulate public transport as tightly as we did. We're going to change that. We're going to loosen things up a bit. And then the really important change, the one that everyone forgets, is that there is a social change. Ordinary Americans decide it's okay to give people a lift in their automobile, in their car for money. Like, I'm not a taxi driver, but I'm just going to drive you from A to B. And you're not a taxi driver, but I'm going to get in your car and you're going to drive me around the city. And the reason that works is because those forces in the sea of uncertainty come ashore, and you get ride sharing services like Uber and Lyft. And all of a sudden, everything changes on your island. You've got this transformation in the technology. You've got other people on the island driving around, taking passengers through the city. And suddenly, the island itself is transformed. And you start saying, actually, is it such a good idea to spend all that money on a New York taxi driver's license? Because everything is different. My island has been transformed. These forces in the sea of uncertainty have come ashore. So what we're starting to talk about here is the different ways that we can work with uncertainty and still make a good decision, even if everything changes. You know, I might be there sitting there as a taxi driver saying, should I get my medallion again? Not knowing that in a short time, we're going to have these smartphones with these apps that change everything about personal transport. And that was an issue 20 years ago in New York and other cities around the world. We're trying to think about 2025 and whatever awaits in the future for us. So what we do here at Oxford at the Business School is we use this diagram of the island and the sea to build scenarios, which are basically pictures of the future that we might have to live in. We say, what if? What if the sea of uncertainty came ashore like this, in this combination, in this direction, in this strength, and it transformed who was on our island, how they worked together, who were the winners, who were the losers, who was competing. Everything around us changed, and maybe that would affect the decisions that we make. And now, the time we have together, there's not enough time to build scenarios, to go through that whole journey together, because actually that takes time. You have to go forwards and backwards over and over again. So what we're going to do together is really just map the island and the sea for you, whether that's for a particular project you're taking on or a particular community. Just before we get there, though, one more thing about scenarios. When we build these pictures of the future, when we say, what if the island that I live on changed dramatically, we can do this for all kinds of reasons. You can see here a spectrum of different options. It can help us be more creative, thinking, good grief, that world would be really different. If I had to live in that world, what would I do that I don't do today? We might learn, we might say, oh, I never noticed that this factor could affect my life. It didn't seem that important. And you can see how people get surprised, can't you? You can see how people weren't ready for AI, and then it arrives and it shocks them. And they say, what are we going to do with this? Is it going to be a good thing? Is it going to be a bad thing? We can start to learn about things before they fully played out by experimenting and testing the limits of that sea of uncertainty and asking ourselves again and again, what if this? What if that? So we can generate different ideas. We can have debates about some of these uncertainties. We can use them to think of different options, to make strategic plans. We can say, actually, if we make a plan, is it still a good plan if our island transforms in times to come? So there's a range of ways that different institutions use this work. It's used by governments, it's used by big businesses, it's used by non-profits, it's used by all kinds of entities around the world. It's quite a sophisticated tool, but what I'm going to give you here is a version that even if you've only got a few minutes, you can use it on the back of a napkin or a piece of paper, or you can draw it using an app on your phone, or you can take your time and go into greater depth and really investigate what's going on. So the really important thing to know at the outset is every single island is different. My island, your island, each one of them will be slightly different because we all have different relationships with different actors, different people, different organizations, different entities around us. And that will affect who's on the island with us and what is out there in the sea of uncertainty. I've been really lucky to work with UK Sport and the UK Sports Institute, who are institutions supporting the British Olympic team. And we've looked at the island and the sea to think about the future, including the Olympics in Brisbane 2032 and even further beyond. But I've actually done the same work looking at those future Olympics in 2032 for other organizations as well. And when you look from a different perspective, when you look from the perspective of Queensland, Australia, which is going to host those Olympics, it is a totally different perspective because it is a different island and therefore a different sea. So right at the outset, if you're going to look at something and say, well, I want to understand how the future could be different to what I expected, to what I assumed, I know I need to go beyond my predictions. One of the things we do is really think about why we're doing this work. Who is this work for? Why are we doing it? And where will we use it? We create a kind of anchor at the start to make sure that what we're doing is useful and relevant, and we're not just having wild ideas, but they're actually helping us. So it's good to think at the start, I recognize I have some serious decisions to make. And right now, the world around me is really uncertain. So who's this work going to be for? Is it for me? Is it for a project? Is it for my school? Is it for my town? Is it for a community? Who are we trying to help to look beyond their assumptions and understand the uncertainties? And then we'd say, why are we doing this? Is it a particular decision? Is it a particular project? Are we concerned about artificial intelligence? Are we concerned about climate change? Is there a theme or a topic? That's the next part. And then the third part is to say, when we do this work, where will we use it? If we map the island of relationships and then the sea of uncertainty for this particular case, are we going to share it? Are we going to bring it for a discussion or a debate? Are we going to give it to some senior decision makers? When we finish this work, what are we going to do with the thing that we've made? So just before we get started, we say who, why, and where. Who is the work for? Why are we doing it? And where will we use it? And that makes sure that the work is really relevant. And we're not just daydreaming of wild futures, but we're actually saying this stuff matters and this is the reason why. And essentially, it's beautifully simple. You take a nice big piece of paper, or you could do this on an interactive whiteboard or another kind of app, and you make an island like this, taken up about 50% of the screen or the page. And on that island, you put the person that the work is for, the equivalent of that New York taxi driver, the scenario learner or the scenario user, we call them here at the business school. It might be you. It might be your school. It might be your town. It might be your community. It might be the people running a particular climate project, and you think they need to think about uncertainty. You put that user there on the island, and then you put all the other organizations and communities and people and entities they interact with on the island with them. Who do they have relationships with as part of their day-to-day life and work? If you think about a school, it has teachers, it has students, it has management, it has governors. It has the people who supply the chairs and the desks and the people who run the IT. It has a relationship with a power company. It has a relationship with local government. It has a relationship with national government. It might have a relationship with universities or unions. It might have relationships with local parks, community groups. You think about every single entity and organization that your user has a relationship with, and you put all of those entities on the island, all of those actors on the island. It is everyone you have a relationship with right here and right now in 2025. And you know how it is with making a map. Sometimes you need really sophisticated, real-time satellite digital maps with all of the detail and information on it. And even you can see if there's a traffic jam around the next corner, and you can see the weather, and you can see everything on the map real time, and it gets really intense. Sometimes, if you just want to say, this is how you get from my house to my friend's house, all you need is just to draw a few lines on a piece of paper, and it's really simple. It's the same with this kind of map. You don't want it to be so complicated that you can't understand it anymore. But also, if you make it too simple, is it really a really useful map for you? So what you do is you play a little bit and just find what's the right level of detail here on the island. Who is on the island with us? Just play with that for a little bit and capture that island of relationships as they are right here and right now in 2025. And then when you've done that, we start to think about the sea of uncertainty. And that means we're going to think about those factors which are outside of our learners' direct control, but they still affect life on the island. So what we do for a moment is we forget about the learner, and then we say, okay, we've taken the learner out of the game for a moment. We're just thinking about everyone else on the island. What factors, what forces, what trends, what uncertainties affect those actors' decisions? And we start to put those in the sea of uncertainty. Now, some of those factors might affect just one or two actors. Some of them might affect everyone on the island. Those could be things like geopolitics. They could be things like AI, new technologies. They could be things like climate uncertainties themselves. It might be things like how the world is run. What does government look like? It could be things that are really, really close to home. If your school is by a river, then the water level of the river and the chances of a flood, that is a pretty significant factor in the sea of uncertainty. And the idea that the water might literally come ashore. But what you do is you've got that island of relationships and you just go outside of the island and you say, what are the things that we can't control, but they affect life on our island? They influence the decisions made by other people. And so you play with that. And you said, with the example of the New York taxi drivers, it was things like the invention of the smartphone and people being willing to give strangers a lift in their automobile and deregulation of public transport. These were things that if I was a taxi driver, I couldn't control. They were out there in the sea of uncertainty and they came ashore on my island. So take your time and have a go. And really, this is nice work to do together as well, to see where you agree and disagree and find your way to a map that you can use together collectively. You're building that map. And the last thing to say is sometimes it's really good to make sure you've got a mix of factors. It's not always just, oh, it's all about technology or it's all about climate. And one of the ways you can do it is you can say, what are the social factors, the factors that come from how people relate to one another? What are the technological factors? What are the economic factors, the things that are to do with money and finance? What are the environmental factors? What are the things that relate to the natural world and the world that surrounds us? What are the political factors and the legal factors, the things that come from the institutions which exercise power and authority? And even what are the ethical factors? When people think about what is right and what is wrong, are there things out there in the sea of uncertainty where people's changing values might affect life on the island? Perhaps people will have a different sense of what matters in life in the future, and then that might affect our island as well. So you spend time just building this map, and already you'll see, okay, this is our world, but actually beyond that island, there's all these uncertainties. And at first it seems like we really don't have a lot of control. And if they came ashore, they would really, really challenge our thinking. Because what we do now is we actually pick a few factors and just say, how would our island change if these factors came ashore in ways we didn't expect? You know, like actually, if we did have this change to climate and this technology and people started behaving differently as well, how would that change our island? Would there be different institutions or different entities on our island? Would people behave differently? Would there be different competition? Would there be new winners and new losers? What would happen to our world? Would we even have schools? Would people still have to go to work? Would people still have to have jobs? All kinds of things might happen to our island as different factors played out over time. And so we start to think a little bit about the future. We say, you know, there are uncertainties out there around us. And then if those waves came ashore, what would change? Like if we had AI that really thought better than humans or as well as humans, what would that do? What happens if different climate impacts hit in different ways? What happens if people change their behavior? What happens if businesses have more power than governments? What happens if communities have more power? How could things shift in ways we don't currently expect? And this is where I come to a really, really useful question, which is from Mateo from Valencia in Spain, which makes me really happy because obviously I am a Mateo as well, and I actually happen to be in the Comunidad Valenciana, not far from Valencia as we're speaking. So Mateo, un saludo desde la Costa Blanca. Mateo asks, you talked about challenging our assumptions, but how do we even begin to recognize what assumptions we're making in the first place? And Mateo is absolutely spot on. So if we're going to think, How could these factors come ashore from the sea of uncertainty in ways that we didn't expect to change our island? That means we must have thought about what we expect or what we assume. And the wonderful thing is, here is the other tool which can be so useful for you. And it's simply this. No one has a magic crystal ball that really gives access to the future. The truth is, nobody knows the future before it arrives. We don't have time machines. We don't have magic crystal balls. Nobody can see that future before it arrives. But that doesn't mean it isn't useful sometimes to play with the crystal ball. Because what we can do is do a little thought experiment. And it works like this. You can imagine that you had a magic crystal ball that would definitely tell you what the future held. And you've made your map of the island and the sea. So you've thought a little bit about the relationships today and the uncertainties that surround them. So what you can do now is ask yourself, if you had this magic crystal ball, if you could definitely know what the future held, what one question would you ask about the future we'll live in? What question would you ask? And you can think here and be really, really clever. Is it a yes or no question? Is it an open question to get more information? What question would you ask to find out as much as you could about the future we will live in? And just look at how that question is framed. It says, what question would you ask about the future we will live in? That means it's not going to tell you what to do. It's not going to tell you what's right or wrong. It's not going to tell you if things go well or badly. It's just going to describe the future that we might have to inhabit. It's going to describe that changed island. So what one question would you ask about the future that we live in? And then once you've chosen that question, you can ask yourself, okay, well, what would be a reassuring answer for me to hear from that question? What would be a reassuring answer for me to hear in response to the question I just came up with? And you'd write down your answer. And then you could think, what would be a more challenging answer for me to hear? What would be an answer that really challenged me in response to that question I came up with? And then finally, after you've noted down your challenging answer, you can say, okay, what do I currently expect the answer to be? What do I actually expect the answer to be? So you go through these 4 points, asking the crystal ball a question about the future that we're going to live in, thinking what would be a reassuring answer, thinking what would be a more challenging answer, and then thinking about the answer you actually currently expect. And this gives us a way of looking at our assumptions, because when you look at the answers to these 4 questions, you are seeing these are the things that people are thinking about today, because these are the things they're choosing to ask questions about. And then we have their hopes, their fears, and their expectations. In those 3 answers, the reassuring, challenging, and the expected answer, we see the kind of expectations people have and the assumptions they hold today. So Matteo, what we do is we pretend we have this crystal ball and we just see, what do people ask the crystal ball and what answers can they already come up with? Because if we're trying to be useful, then what we need to do is show them something they couldn't already think of just by doing this thought experiment with a crystal ball. We need to show them something surprising, challenging, but useful. And that means we have to look and say, okay, if we imagine these factors coming together in this combination, in this direction, how could they come ashore in ways which go beyond the crystal ball question, that actually show us something beyond what is reassuring, what is challenging, what is expected, something that is surprising, but that is also useful. And that means we can then start to say, okay, so the island transforms, new winners, new losers, different kinds of competition or collaboration, different values, just like being a taxi driver on an island where there's now Uber and Lyft and bike lanes and all kinds of things transforming around you. Those changes have implications for you as a learner on this island. And in that way, we can start to explore what it means to make a decision that still makes sense, even if the sea of uncertainty comes ashore in ways that we didn't assume, didn't expect, didn't hope, or didn't even fear. We start to really think about what that changed context would mean for us. We're not trying to predict the future. We're trying to imagine how it could be different. We're trying to look for the thing that is almost at the corner of our eye, the thing that we didn't even know we needed to look at. And Zofia from Krakow has a really good question here, where she says, well, when you're planning for these different islands and imagining these different futures, how do you stop yourself from being too optimistic or too pessimistic? And this is a really good question, right? Because it's so easy to say, well, here's the island I want, and it's lovely and sunny, and here's the island I really don't want. It's all dark and scary. And then in the end, you sort of ignore them and you just go for something in the middle. But actually, what we're doing here is we're looking for the island which is challenging, which makes us think differently. We already dealt with the crystal ball. We dealt with the hope, the fear, the expectation. We're not even looking at the light and dark. We're looking for the different visions of the future, those different future islands, which make us think, oh, good grief, things could be different. That's surprising. That makes me curious. That makes me intrigued. That's difficult, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily pessimistic or dystopian. And one of the tricks I like to do is stop thinking about which island I want and instead think, on that island, what would they think of me? If those factors in the sea of uncertainty came ashore and changed the island, that would take time. It would go out into the future. And you might say, oh, I think that change would probably take 10 years to completely happen. And so then you know we're talking about 2035. And so you can say, on that island in 2035, what are they going to think about me? How are they going to judge the decisions I'm making today? Are they going to have the same values as I did? Are they going to have the same opinions and perspectives? Instead of me saying, is this island too optimistic or pessimistic from the perspective I have in 2025? You can say, am I a good ancestor from the perspective of people on that island? Are people on that particular future island, with those factors coming ashore, with those changes, are they going to think that I made good decisions today? Are they going to have the same opinions that I hold in 2025? So I think that's a good way to play with this question of optimism and pessimism. Now, it's really been a whistle-stop tour, but the thing I want you to take away is the idea that we live on an island of relationships surrounded by a sea of uncertainty, and we can create a map of those things. And once we have the map of the island of relationships surrounded by the sea of uncertainty, we can say, how could those uncertainties come ashore in different ways, in different combinations, and change our island in ways we didn't expect? And the way we deal with that question of expectation is we use the crystal ball questions. We find out the questions people already are asking. We look at the hopeful and the fearful and the expected answers, and we say, okay, so we know what you hope, fear, and expect. We have an idea of your assumptions. So when we play with the sea of uncertainty, when we bring it ashore, let's make sure we come up with something that goes beyond whatever you came up with in the crystal ball task. Let's really challenge ourselves to go further. And wonderfully, as we come to the end of this little session, there is a question just come in from Theo in Lyon, in France, saying, what is one mindset shift you think young people need in order to navigate climate uncertainty more effectively? What's one mindset shift you think young people need in order to navigate climate uncertainty more effectively? And I think what I'd say is that island of relationships is where you know you have influence. And that sea of uncertainty sometimes seems out of your control. But the truth is, if we work together, if we collaborate, if we come up with clever ways to strategize and work together, we can find ways to influence that sea of uncertainty. So I think the one change is to say, you will never have complete control over everything in the universe. There will always be something that is outside of your control and uncertain, something in the sea waiting to come ashore. But at the same time, we are never completely powerless. You can always decide, even if it's just, I'm going to step one step this way or one step that way. There is always some agency. There is always some opportunity to make a difference. And the reason we do this work, the reason we build the island and the sea, we look at the crystal ball questions, the reason that we at the business school work with scenarios and tools to help people make decisions under the conditions of uncertainty is because the decisions we make matter, they can make a difference, and they can have real consequences. And the trick to all of this is to understand that even though we will never have complete power over everything, we always have some agency and some influence over something. And the trick is to use that, to use it bravely, and to use it wisely and to use it to make a difference. Thank you so much for this time together. I hope it's been helpful. And of course, I'm really happy if the conversation continues. Enjoy the rest of the summit. I'll be back for another session later, but this was just a short introduction to the island, the sea, the crystal ball questions as a way of navigating the sea of uncertainty and challenging assumptions about what the future holds. Thank you so much for your time.